think the focus has very much been on innovation tonight. I think the one thing I was wondering, we've got a great group of speakers from kind of different parts, not necessarily just within the industry, but kind of beyond, and all the kind of people that we interact with. But I just wanted to kind of get everyone's perspective from kind of your own point of view. Are there any barriers to innovations kind of within the kind of environments you work in? And I'm not talking about the kind of I've been to like any number of BIM conferences where the kind of like change management and resistance to change. Assuming you could persuade people that yours is the right solution, yours is the right approach, what barriers are there? Andrew, do you want to?
Go on then. I mean, you've got to be controversial on a panel, haven't you? I think the biggest barrier that I see a lot of the time at the moment is innovation's huge in the construction industry, but there's a difference between the people who want to actually innovate and change the way that they're working and the people who want to seem innovative. So there's two different things there. Having an innovative solution, and sometimes that can just be something like, oh, we did something in VR. Okay, great, it's really cool, yeah, and maybe it added something, but you're not changing your process through doing it. And I think real innovation means changing your process completely to get a more effective solution.
Changing or revolving? Do you have to completely go back to scratch?
Probably fairer, yeah.
David?
Who was it who said money and time, was it? Yeah, so that's clearly a constraint. But I think from my perspective, the biggest constraint is not necessarily the technology itself. The dream is to find the CEO that is visionary, prepared to take risks.
Well, I think innovation is overused and sometimes misused as a word. In construction especially, and the ways they look into innovation. And I think one thing we have to remember, innovation means something absolutely new, and it has to be innovative. And in Britain, we're very good to do that, and we do actually do a lot of stuff in further, but probably we're the hardest people to accept innovation and adopt it. And in construction, that's very difficult to certain client to actually accept the innovation. Yes. Yes.
I'm going to have to be controversial and say consumer behaviour. Frankly, I think, again, like you just said, innovation can mean a whole host of things. But I think even when you look at particular industries, like the engineering and building industry for one, and throughout people's behaviour with technology is completely different, from the people on the sites to the engineers drawing up the plans. So, but actually once you look at consumer behaviour, is an overarching societal behaviour. So you need consumer behaviour to drive user experience with technology and innovation for a wide subset of users within an industry to understand and believe in it.
So it's almost like the trends, the particular trends are the kind of what guides what's seen as innovative. Kobus?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point, I find this kind of, I mean, I don't want to use a typical word of siloing, but siloing is a big barrier for what I'm involved with, at least. And I find, funny enough, that in the construction industry, there's more siloing with each other than with the industries outside of the construction industry. I mean, if you look at VR and AR as an example again, or anything, these things are easily adopted, but it's not necessarily worked into a process in the construction industry, and it's from outside of there. And you know, I think this is partly what makes companies like the Ubers and those so successful, is because there are no barriers, and we try to make these defined paths of how we should do things in our industry. And I think we should break that, because it's going to go away at some stage.
Do you feel it has to take something seriously innovative to break through those barriers, or just kind of?
Not. You know, I hope that all of a sudden half the world's architects aren't out of business. So, you know, that's not what I hope for. So I hope that they rather adopt and progress with what's happening already. So.
I think kind of feeds back to what I was saying at the beginning, that yeah, kind of communication and kind of there's a lot of inspiration there, but at the end of the day, you need to innovate to survive. So, Sam.
Yeah, leave the funding guy till last. So I think to answer this, I'll put my Innovate UK hat on rather than BIM Task Group hat. So we funded a lot of innovative projects inside construction and infrastructure, one of which is the 3-year EPRO project. Now, one of the challenges actually is the construction industry operating on very small margins. It is that CEO leadership, as he spoke about, somebody who's actually willing to take those products and services from innovative SMEs and embed them into their organisations. Now, one of the big challenges of industrialising or improving the productivity of construction, particularly around using tools like BIM and others, is it actually exposes all the places where people hide the money. So it exposes all of the inefficiencies in construction projects. Construction companies are only making a few percentages on projects. If you suddenly require this level of information standardization, a lot of them are not going to survive. So this is not just about embedding innovation. You're actually going to see a consolidation of the market, because some of the companies who don't adapt or who have not got on any of the kind of journeys so far, they're simply not going to be able to survive in the new markets.
It's interesting. I think that's the common theme from sort of kind of everyone that's spoken. It's kind of that almost like not quite innovate or die, but you've got to be willing to take that risk to really push things forward, to really make that change.
Mention as well is this whole industrialization point, and I mean, it's again taking another industry, and yet we still produce things with hammers and nails, you know, where other guys are doing it completely different. I mean, there's a move happening, so it's going to happen soon.
Simon, one thing, Sush, as you mentioned, which is worries me, you're doing standardization in IoT.
So actually, no, that's we're adopting IoT from other industries. We're not going to attempt to, that's we learn our lessons on those. But yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that whatever the new future of construction infrastructure becomes, it has to adopt the latest trends in those technologies, not try to reinvent things, because otherwise it's going to be catching up once again.
And I think to pick up on one of the questions that was quite interesting at the last session, and kind of following on from the last one, is you've mentioned everyone's mentioned there's that need to kind of like be that risk taker. But who do you think should be leading that innovation? Whose responsibility is it to kind of push innovation forward, not just in our industry, but kind of across the board? So Simon, do you want to start with that one?
Okay, so it's two things. I think on an industry where, like construction, where you've actually got a significant lead customer, which is government, then you have to use the government as a lead customer to pull the industry in a particular direction. That's been very effective on the previous BIM mandate. That as a lever has worked very, very well. Again, but it's very analogous to the automotive industry. The automotive industry had emission standards, and that drove significant chunks of innovation and technology to meet those emission standards. So that's one example. But you can't have one without the other. So you've got to be able to carrot and stick. You've got to be able to encourage those companies to adapt and modernise and innovate, but also you've got to help them by giving them the money and resources and capabilities to actually undertake that R&D necessary to change the businesses.
It's a tricky one. I mean, I feel companies and groups innovate very quickly if they have to. It really happens super quickly. So I think if you can create the need, like you're saying about emission and so forth. I mean, you know, the whole fact that if you do government work, you have to deliver BIM. You know how quick companies jumped onto that, and there's still companies that don't deliver that don't do government work, and they will carry on for the next 10 years not delivering to the right standard. You know, if you force someone to do, or not force, but if you put a goal in front of somebody to say, well, we have to do it this way to proceed to make things better, you'll be surprised how quick they update it. And I think it's kind of like that carrot that you have to create. That's going to come from.
There's a problem to kind of address it, move on.
Making sure the problem hits home. That's a big thing. So that doesn't always happen.
I mean, we all know innovation is inherently risky, and companies want to decrease the risk as much as they can. I think it should be one central mandate for any government to promote innovation, because that will only knock on and help technology, business, and even society within that said government.
One thing, which as you mentioned, the needs actually forces people to innovate. And one of the need but as well, the need accept other people innovation. And in terms of problem, we wouldn't have got contracts if actually it wasn't a problem, a genuine problem that this innovation will solve. And I would say definitely the drive, it would be. The need, it will push the people to innovate.
Yeah, probably consistent with that. I think those that feel the benefit most will drive the innovation agenda. In this industry, I think it's probably the owners of assets that feel the benefit most, and those that sell the innovation.
I think it's a collaboration effort between us as software vendors to be able to develop solutions, but we can't do it without the industry pushing us to tell us what problems we need to solve and be able to test it for us and really adopt it, because I think our level of innovation is slowed down by the slow level of adoption of the innovation that we're doing. We can't move it forward unless enough people adopt it.
Yeah, so you can be an innovator waving a huge flag, but if no one's looking, you're not going to get anywhere. I'd like to throw it out to the audience if you've got any questions generally for the panel or relating to any of the specific presentations.
This is for everyone really, just quite kind of a general. From your experiences and your different specialisms, do you find you have biggest interest or adoption from companies that are good, that want to be great, or companies that perhaps are underperforming, are bad, and want to do better?
Who'd like to kick that one off?
The former. Good, want to be great.
Yeah, it's a hard idea because it doesn't come from companies, it comes from individuals. It really comes from individuals who have ambition within. I mean, I'm very lucky to work with pretty much every leading tech company, from your Facebooks, your Googles, et cetera, and when working with smaller companies, in general, people work in their barrier of where that company exists within the entire ecosystem. It's only really when you come across individuals inside that they'll drag the rest of the company with them.
Hopefully up.
Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, so just to come back to the microphone.
Hi there. Question for Simon, actually, if you're allowed to answer it. So I saw that you highlighted you've got your spectrum from building standards to city standards. I was really interested if you could sort of share any more thoughts about your current thinking of how you integrate those, and the one in the middle, which you said was a maybe. I assume that's the Internet of Things standard that's just been published. So if you could share any more about that.
Sure. So there's actually a package of work ongoing at the moment. Actually, there was one further slide I didn't get to, which was just explaining what is actually happening currently. On the Level 3 program, there's an entity which is currently based at the Future Cities Catapult called the Client Design Team. And the client design team, what their job is effectively a group of experts from various industries, including geospatial, smart cities, security, manufacturing, Internet of Things, energy, cultural, commercial. I think that's it. And what they are doing is effectively acting as the client of what Level 3 could become. So they are bouncing the ideas backwards and forwards between the Level 3 team and the client team to say, okay, will that actually work in reality in our industries? One of the particular points of what we have to try and do around the end-to-end set of standards is ensure that where smart cities are concerned, they are kind of approaching the problem from a different perspective. That's really aimed at your local authorities, your city planners, your city developers, when they're trying to build something to serve societal needs. And we're going from the other side, so we're going from ultimately designing buildings to serve CapEx purposes. What you're trying to do is meet the two in the middle, ultimately so you have a sort of holistic set of standards and data flows between the two, so that once your buildings move into design, into operation, maintenance and life cycle stages, you're feeding that information back through the same processes. So you've linked that ecosystem together. Actually, the primary reason why we're doing it is actually for exports. Because once again, it means you've then got a very consistent set of standards and capabilities that UK can excel in and take that overseas.
Hi there, Sim Gao from PCSG. Probably a question for Simon more than anyone else, but I'd be quite interested to get other panels' thoughts. Now, a lot of level 3 is quite hush-hush, but to my mind, I haven't seen anything in level 2 or otherwise saying, looking at critical infrastructure. So the CPNI categorized different infrastructure based upon, I think, financial, social, and there's other risk factors on the basis that they fail. And that goes from category 0 to category 6, category 6 being the most risk-based, so something like if nuclear was to fail. I'm just thinking, should we be thinking in terms of our public infrastructure that's held by private clients, telling them as a mandate to be utilizing BIM to a degree for OPEX, so in terms of stuff that they already do, but could be of risk to us nationally. Should we not be getting them to be on board with the level of BIM that we already ask contractors to?
That's actually quite a tricky question. So effectively, the way that the original BIM mandate worked was to pull a large section of the market in one direction. And by doing that, it meant that the benefits of using the BIM standards to improve your operational efficiency and your outputs actually then embed inside the organisation, so that organisation gets a competitive advantage over people that don't do it the BIM way, with the idea that then pulls the remaining part of the market forwards. And actually that can kind of be seen because we've got sort of adoption rates of BIM at around, I think, 50% in the latest MBS survey. It was around that sort of level, where again the market was only 40% originally of public sector procurement. So, but with regards to cyber security, that again is something that the market really needs to sort out, because as a client, why would you specify that your design company does not design to the security standards that are provided? Because actually it's going to be your assets and your capabilities that are at risk, and potentially your own organisation that's at risk. So that's kind of the way the market has to sort this stuff out. Some people will get competitive advantage by using and selling capabilities based upon those standards. But there are only certain things that the government can mandate, or in certain political ways, only certain governments will mandate. Let's see what happens after the election. But that's typically the way that the standards have operated. So you pull one sector of the market in a certain direction, and you let the private sector sort the rest out.
I suppose just adding to that, I know that if you were to look at Sellafield, for instance, uptake there has been quite difficult. And I asked a question at a BIM for Nuclear conference, which was, in terms of the uptake of BIM, what sort of scares you more? Is it the fact that you believe someone could hack a CDE when in fact you can decentralize it and then bring it together at any one point in time? Or is it the fact that you have so much confidence in your infrastructure and knowing where everything is, that if something was to fail, that you would know what the issue was? And they couldn't give an answer. So.
To be honest, that sounds like a market opportunity for somebody to go in there and start be able to help them with those problems. Like I said, there are only certain things that the government will get behind mandating, but the help is out there for private organisations to take some of this responsibility on. And actually, some are taking this quite seriously and what they can do and what they can offer. But like I say, there is only certain levels of things the government can really mandate.
Two more questions. This is anyone else has got anything?
Quick questions. Simon, you mentioned I'm going to ask everyone else, but you mentioned the emissions. The first thing that comes to mind is the scandal that was happening with the cars and Volkswagen. So the question to the remaining panelists is, what you as representatives of the industry are going to make and going to ensure, how are you going to ensure that these kind of scandals are not going to happen in the BIM world? If the government mandates that you have to deliver BIM on your projects, how do you make sure that individuals or whole companies are not skewing it?
You want to kick that one off, Andrew?
I think, well, it comes back to the model checking and analytics side of things that the government's mandating moving forward as well, I think. It was supposed to be a stretch target for BIM level 2. I don't think we really quite reached it, but there is a plan in place that the government will want validated data, not just any old data that you're sticking into the project, and that's the way it's got to go eventually.
I think sort of just to touch on what a couple of you said right at the beginning of the Q&A, where there's a couple of people felt that there's sort of a difference between the true innovators and the people that shout out and say, I'm an innovator, but there's kind of, it might not actually be much there. I think that kind of links to the whole sort of idea of the risk of an upcoming scandal, that sort of something goes as far as it can, and it's maybe not entirely what it seemed to be. Or is it? I'm not sure if that's an unfair comment, but is there a risk for kind of a scandal in innovation?
You're looking at me?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more points of entry there are into data sources, every device, everything presents a risk. So, particularly when you're talking about critical infrastructure, the security aspect of it is absolutely paramount.
But if you do it real time, and you can see that changes straight away, you're actually able to tell and able to validate that kind of things which is happening real time or not real time. The problem is most of the infrastructure where you have data, they are not real time. And it might be an old data which is we are using, and that old data is not being verified, and things change. And that is the problem when you have a model and you are actually, that model is changed, because building as a building are actually moving things, and they do move, and they do actually differentiate in different things. So even if you measure that point in a space at this location in X, Y, and Z, in a few years, that point actually moved, because the Earth is moving, so it will move. And that, to validate that, if you don't have a real-time system that actually give you a real-time answers, it's very, very critical, and to have that kind of, error or misunderstanding of kind of the readings.
Is there any parallels in there?
I mean, just in general, I think it parallels back to innovation, because as BIM infrastructure expands, it's inconsequentially across the globe to bringing cities together, then if you're not constantly innovating on your software side and your technology side, and you fall behind by the times by 10 years, the potential for negative reactions to happen increase. So it's about just keeping investment in innovation.
I like a comment that Steve made earlier, which is he mentioned the word bandwidth, and I think we need a lot more bandwidth for the security levels to become, in particular, become a useful thing to us. And one of the things that we try to knock on the whole time is to get data from buildings we have built, and the main reason for that is to find out how these things are actually used. I mean, we could suggest and predict how buildings are going to be used, but the best thing is to actually find out how these buildings are used to build better buildings the next time. But that's a wall. We can't get through that. And I can't see that in the near future, and it's all about security. And I think once we get to a system where there's truly authentication happening with the exchange of data for this, we're not going to get there. And we really need to get there to make better environments as such.
So if I may just wrap up with one final question, just to kind of sum up the theme of innovation, either sort of within your own roles or kind of looking at the industry or some kind of the environment we live in around you. Is there any way you feel, and I think this would be interesting, kind of almost like future gazing, is there any way you feel that we're lacking in innovation? Any way you think that you're seeing there's a missed opportunity, or there's something that, like, I wish someone would come out with a product that would solve this, or the software that would solve this? Is there any part of our industry that frustrates you, or any part of life that you think is screaming out for innovation?
Planning.
planning.
Planning cities,
general.
planning building houses, planning commercial developments.
Thinking ahead.
Yeah,
what's-
long scale, basically wide scale UK
Yeah.
planning laws, rules, regulations, and processes.
So
I
there's
think
scope
it's-
for innovation in implications.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cobus?
Sure. I don't know, it's a big question. I've got a lot of things I want to get moving on to, but yeah, I mean, I get back to the whole thing that I mean, just as from my previous thing, you know, if we can figure out what people really want to do, and there's a lot of sources for it, it would be great, it would be a good source for us, and to make things really worth it in terms of design.
Find out what there's the demand for. Steve?
The thing that I keep coming across is fear of failure. We've been fortunate enough to work with Skanska, but there's been a lot of conversations with other large engineering companies on BIM-type products and really truly bringing innovation through. And actually conversations progress positively to a point where whoever is at the end of that line doesn't want to put his salary on the line for, you know, for a risky project. So it's that fear of failure, I think, that's really holding it back.
So you feel that innovation is there, that kind of if a problem, someone
I
responds to it, it's
think
just that kind
there's
of
enough talented
willingness.
people across every innovation sector across the world to affect change, but nobody wants to be the reason why that £1 million spend went down the toilet. It's fear of failure and non-acceptance of failure.
I think if you believe of certain innovation, and it's easy for me because actually I'm an engineer, so I innovate, and I've worked with various companies on working on deep hardware, software layers. So that is the question which is asked, okay, there is a problem, we need to solve it. And in terms of what is there, how to push it through, risk, yes, we need to take risk. That's always the main head. But I think as well, companies and larger corporations to actually accept and adapt these changes and accept that they are working with the smaller companies and that innovation could come in from individuals and very small group.
So I think the frustration for me is that, so I think there's a difference between invention and innovation. I think that the technology available all around us is, you know, is kind of ahead of the ambition actually. But I don't think there's any single entity, any single organisation that is going to deliver all of the things that we kind of want in this industry. It will require coming together and innovating together to deliver that. But I think actually there is no barrier to that. It should just happen, and it could happen tomorrow. I guess we get back to the money thing and the CEO with ambition that wants to. That's what's going to actually drive it. You know, if you get the right people in the room as part of that ecosystem, it'll happen. There's no barrier.
Yeah, things come together naturally if there's a willingness to.
I think in terms of what the construction industry needs, the answer is, well, I'm going to say this, but it's what I think we're aiming for at 3D Repo, and that is to use previous projects and data analytics and data mining to predict future outcomes. So using all the past data that we've got from projects and being able to data mine that and predict how we're going to perform in the future is what the construction industry isn't doing at the moment. We're just blindly moving forward and not looking back, I don't think, enough at what we've done in the past.
Which is an interesting counterpoint to Simon's point that the problem is that we're not that good at kind of looking forward either.
Yeah, but I think it is about looking forward, but it's using the past to be able to predict the future, right?
Just consider your environment. Oh, can I just have a big round of applause for all our speakers? And a big thank you to all the 3D Repo team as well for organising this evening. But I think the clear consensus is that innovation is there, it's taking place, and it's up for all of us to make sure that it happens and it's kind of heading in the right direction. So thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers.